I'm thrilled to be back as the leader of the BC Liberal Party. As you probably know, in the past, almost 10 years ago now, I was the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Finance. And prior to that, I was Minister of Transportation, Minister of Health. So I've had some experience in different roles. The last 10 years I've spent in the private sector, and with my wife, Jessica, raising our two daughters, Josephine, who's 12, and Rose, who has just turned 9. And it's been fantastic, and I've loved the opportunity to be home with the family. But I'm returning to politics because of my kids, or at least that generation of children, because I think it's very, very important that we have leadership in this province and in this country that is thinking about decisions that affect the next generation. And so that's the main purpose for coming back. And as I look at the last year, I spent most of the last year competing for the leadership of the party. And I'm pleased that when we completed that and we had the vote for the leader, I was really pleased earlier this year to receive a very, very strong endorsement from the party membership. And I think that's been fantastic. I think as a party over the last year, we've probably, I think, started to do a pretty good job of really holding government to account. I mean, the major job of the official opposition is to, say where the government is not doing things well. And so, as we pointed out, we've got the highest housing prices in the history of our province ever. And that's in spite of the fact that this government, back in 2017, in their very first budget that they introduced a whole bunch of taxes onto the housing sector because they misdiagnosed the problem. They said that the problem was caused by foreigners and that it was, just developers that were making money. And if they just put a bunch of taxes in place, that will fix the problem. Well, here we are, 5 years later, and we can see that clearly hasn't worked. We've got more expensive housing than we've ever had. And I think that makes it hard for young people in particular to imagine themselves being able to, buy and own their first home. But the same thing with grocery prices. We've seen the same thing with gasoline. Even before the Ukraine war that unfortunately broke out in Europe, British Columbia had the highest gas prices in North America, not just in Canada, but in North America. And they're 50 cents per liter higher than Alberta. They're 40 cents a liter higher than Ontario. And we've been pointing that out to the government. We've had a premier that's promised since 2018 to do something about that, and keep saying that they're looking at it and they'll think about it and all this. But in the meantime, I think British Columbians are really suffering, especially low-income British Columbians that haven't got the ability to support these kind of higher gas prices. So in all of those areas, I think the opposition, the BC Liberals, have done a very good job in pointing out some of the shortcomings in government, but we're also, under my leadership, pointing out what we would do differently. And I think that's really important too, because we want to show what BC Liberals will do that's going to be very different from the NDP. And so, for example, on housing, we're saying we have two major problems. One, the cost of housing, and two, the restricted supply of new housing. And we have to force local governments to do their bit to ensure that we get much more supply of new housing of all kinds, condos, townhomes, single family, where that makes sense. But we've got to just flood the marketplace with a whole bunch more new supply. Because if we don't do that, we're never going to have a situation where there's going to be any affordability. And the other thing that I want to do is look at the housing market through the eyes of a first-time buyer, so that young British Columbians have the confidence to know that they've got a government that's thinking about how they will ever get into housing. And the way I want to do that is look at all of the costs that government imposes on housing and strip away a lot of those costs that act as a barrier to first-time buyers, because I'm very focused on helping people that want to get into the market but just can't, because the barriers are so high. The difficulty of saving up a down payment is so hard. And there's ways that we can provide solutions to that. And that's what I'm excited about doing as the new leader of the BC Liberals. So, and revenue neutral carbon tax. We were the government. I was there in 2008 when we introduced North America's very first revenue neutral carbon tax. And what that meant was that every penny that we collected in carbon tax by law had to be returned to the public in the form of lower personal income taxes and lower business taxes. And so we purposefully made the carbon tax a shift, not a tax grab. But unfortunately, the NDP in their first budget changed the law so that they now take all that revenue into government and they spend it however they want. And that's unfortunate because that makes the higher gas prices even worse for British Columbians, because the government profits off the higher gas prices, but the public gets no benefit because none of that money is being returned to them in the form of lower taxes. So these are the kind of things, Seema, that I will be talking about to British Columbians over the next couple of years. But I also want to add this, because this I think is really important. Our party has to be different too. One thing that's very, very important to me is that this party must become much more diverse. I want to make sure that our party reflects the communities that we hope to represent. And that means that we have to have members in our party and we have to have candidates in our party that are going to look like the British Columbia that we see today. And that's something I'm really excited about, because I think that it gives us the opportunity to ensure and go out and recruit some great Persian, South Asian, Chinese candidates that can run for the party. And that's something that I'm taking personal responsibility for. And I am going to be personally out there encouraging people to get involved in the party.